So what are you trying to do at that time? Enlarge in understanding as well?
No. What you do is you try to deepen the experience and begin to feel it physically. I always use the same example because it's a good example. That is of a person who is being chased by a dog. If you feel it from the perspective of the one who's being chased by the dog, it is that, and that's very much in the chest and in the breathing. But then this was a dream about a rabbit dog. But then when you look at the dog and you begin to focus at the dog and you can feel those jaws and that bloodthirst in the dog, as you feel the bloodthirst in the dog, you are suddenly in the subjectivity of the dog. Now, if you can feel both these states at the same time, and you can feel up to 4 or 5 states at the same time, as you feel those states at the same time, so in the chest, that thing of, and in the jaws, the thing, and if you feel them at the same time, something new begins to emerge. Jung talks about, because he's he's a polarity thinker, he talks about that as the transcendent function, so that when you hold two opposing states, something new begins to emerge. Nobody in the non-Jungian world knows what a transcendent function is. These days, this is called an emergent phenomenon, a self-organization of an emergent phenomenon, and the emergent phenomenon is not just between two, but you can have 3, 4, 5 states that you can feel at the same time, and it begins to self-organize.
There's something important about that I don't know, I'm talking in a general sense, in terms of how polarized, how habitual it is to become polarized, right? You
yes.
Join one tribe or the other, one side or the other, whatever. But as someone said the other day, it's like, different. We should be thinking in terms of difference rather than polarities, and to be able to hold differences. What I'm trying to say is that kind of primary experience, it seems to me, can kind of flow out into a way of being in the world a little bit more, where one can hold differences.
I am most influenced by the notion of networks. So there's a multiplicity of nodal points that are in constant state of feedback, and creating lots of feedback loops. So that's why when I work, I usually don't do 2 states, but usually 3 or 4 or 5, and feel them at the same time, so that you get a network of states. And as you feel the network of states, you don't get into this polarity opposing stuff, but you get into feedback loops between all of them, and something new emerges from those feedback loops.
Which is what Jung called the transcendent function, basically.
Yeah, but Jung called it the transcendent function because he was working in polarities.
Right.
Polarities is about 2 states that are opposing each other. And I think that that's a huge problem in Jungian psychology, that Jung and many Jungians are thinking in polarities, and that's one of the things that Hillman undid, right? Hillman undid the notion of self, he undid the notion of hierarchy, and he undid the notion of polarity. And he says there's a multiplicity, there's many nodal points, there are many gods, and they're all in constant states of interaction, and it is not, and that's why when you read Hillman's Alchemy, which I think is the best alchemical psychology that's been written, I prefer to Jung. In his book Alchemical Psychology, he is interested in the inner life of the metals, in the inner life of the processes. He's not interested in the movement that Jung is interested in, from the masculine and the feminine marrying together and creating the hermaphrodite. It's just one of the stories. It is not the main story. It is one of the stories, and there are many, many different stories. And so what happened I'm getting too excited. Oh.
Well, that's good stuff.
Okay. So what happened in the 70s, so you have to see that I was in Zurich in the 70s. What happened in the 70s was, and the late 60s and the 70s, was this whole process of deconstruction, right? Deconstruction, Derrida, Foucault. The deconstruction was that it came at the same time as the post-colonial period, that the colonizing of the grand narratives of the West was cut down. And as the grand narratives of the West bit the dust, there were all these other narratives that were beginning to sprout up. And there were then hundreds of different narratives. Yeah. And it was no longer held under one Western monotheistic narrative. Now, Hillman did that, and I don't know if he knew it at the time when he was doing it, but that's what he did for Jung. He took out the notion of unity, and that unity was the most important thing, and hierarchy, that the self organizes things, that there is a self that organizes things.
Yeah. And we've got the poly comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all legitimate in their own right, all the different gods. Yeah, it's not that one's better than the other. We can't say that.
So it's a horizontal structure. And that kind of horizontal structure is much more like complexity theory, is much more like what now also is used in artificial intelligence. It is the notion that there are many narratives, and all these narratives have feedback loops with each other. And in these dozen or hundreds of narratives, I mean, in India, they have a million gods. All these interactions of narratives, that's where it's at.
So maybe this podcast, but don't you think that maybe also people are floundering with that? Because, it's kind of like as bad as the church was, in my mind, thinking, after it went, started to love Aristotle and all of that, and having control over the narrative, it did hold things together to a certain extent. Whereas now, in just the incredible multitude of influences, that it may be that the felt sense is it's a chaos.
Right. And so that's why I think complexity theory is so important, because the complexity theory says that at the border between order and chaos, there is self-organization that takes place. So there is organization, there is self-organization, but there's no self that organizes it. And that process, that ongoing process of self-organization, if you can get into that, gives a lot of shape and gives a lot of form, but it takes a lot of daring, because you constantly fall into it, because you're on the edge of chaos all the time. But the edge of chaos is the most creative moment. And I think that at this moment, people are terrified of chaos. And then, of course, we have a president, a king of chaos.
Yes. And maybe a response to that, it seems to me, is to try to build certainty and rules and certainty, whereas I would kind of think maybe it's more leaning into the chaos, which is what, that's another way of approaching it.
Yes, because that is the most creative way of being. And because you have enough order to hold on to, but it's like the fool in the tarot cards. You have a tarot card behind you, right? The fool in the tarot cards is the one who steps off the cliff. That is the moment of complexity. That is where you don't know what's going to happen, and you are in that complete unknown, but you still have 1 foot on the rock and 1 foot in chaos. And if you can hold that state, then things begin to organize in very interesting ways. And that's what I try to help people with, so that they get out of their very ordered habitual consciousness, because that is usually the problem. People come to you because their habitual consciousness can no longer deal with the world. And so that you get into a state where it can self-organize into a new condition. And I agree with you that it is so frightening for a lot of people that there's a huge re-emergence of fundamentalism everywhere. All the complexity, all the conspiracy theories are part of fundamentalism. It's a fundamentalist notion. We know what's going on. Really, we know what's going on. It may all look like chaotic, but we know what's going on. It's Bill Gates who's behind it. And so that kind of need to know is getting stronger and stronger, and people are closing up because we're living in a time where we are being encountered with an entirely new world.
Yes, and it's how to be opened up in that new world.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
When you were talking, I was thinking of mystery too, the kind of thing of, well, I might not have the answers, but I do have a love for the mystery. Is
exactly.
Also a way of
It is taking life as a mystery. Life, and that every day is an unfolding of the mystery that you're witnessing and that you're part of and that you can feel, and the mystery goes in many different directions at the same time. But if you foreclose it by knowing what it is, I think it's impoverishing.